Hey guys, welcome to Quinia's Budget Crafts. Remember I said I would explain this basing later? Well, this is why. It's for the roads and scatter and pretty much everything else. But for now, let's do the roads. You're going to want some dollar store clipboards and some self-adhesive cork. Or really any cork. This stuff is, $1 a sheet and it sticks on its own, so that's super convenient. I did totally lift this idea from Gomi Designs. I'll put the link to his video up there. As for the scale you're building to, it's Hot Wheels or Matchbox or whatever these things are. Doesn't really matter, just something along this size. So with these cork sheets, you just peel the backing off and stick it right on. The adhesive on this is really nice, so definitely try to get it right the first time, because if you press it down, it's probably not going to come off very well. For the width of the road, I'm doing half of a sheet of cork just because that's convenient and I don't have any material waste. These sheets are 7 3/4 or 7.75, which is what it says on the package. Half of that is going to be 3.85, otherwise known as 3 7/8. If you didn't know, 7/8 on the ruler is the line that is second to the last. So just go ahead and figure out where half of it is and mark that. So when you go to cut this, you're going to want to cut through the cork first with a very sharp thin blade like from an Olfa knife, but the clipboard is just compressed paper, so it'll cut pretty easily with like a box cutter or something. You don't have to actually use a saw on that. You actually don't have to cut all the way through either. As long as you get it most of the way, you can just bend it and snap it off. Just make sure you have actually gotten most of the way through or you're going to tear off the bottom edge. Alright, so that's all well and good for straight roads, but what if you need to turn? If you play Gaslands at all, you'll notice that the little templates in there are pretty curvy. Most of them are. There's only 3 straights, so we need to make some curves. You could pivot straight off of one corner here, and that would be fine for a really sharp turn, but maybe you don't always want sharp turns. So let's make some templates. What you're going to want to do is get some stiff cardboard like cereal box or pizza rolls in my case. Go ahead and mark out the width of your road and then figure out how big of an area you want the curve to take. Then you trace out the entire area in a big square, the whole area your curve is going to be. Go to whichever corner is the inside corner of your curve and use that as your pivot point with a compass to draw your arches. If your compass isn't big enough, don't think you can cheat by going to the road part and doing the semicircles that way, because you'll see here it just cuts into the road and that's not going to work. So what you can do is take a piece of string with a loop on it, put that loop on your pin, hold the string down at the corner, and now you have a big giant compass. There's your nice curve that matches the same width as your road all the way through. And because you drew the box around it, it now has nice 90-degree ends on either side. So using that method, just go ahead and make up a bunch of templates, whatever shapes and sizes and stuff you like. If you do want 45s and not 90s, you can of course just draw the 90 and then cut that in half. To help prevent any sort of waste, it's a good idea to go ahead and lay out your templates on your cork, as the cork is smaller than the clipboard. I actually didn't plan it this way, it just sort of worked out like this, and it's pretty perfect. There's a little bit of waste, but not enough to care about. As for these little tiny sharp 90-degree ones, you can actually cut those out of the straights if you want to, but I have this extra big section from the big curve, so I'll cut it out of there. The method I found to keep these things from scooting around on me is to put some double-sided tape on there and stick it to the back side of the cork. I suppose you could stick it to the top, it doesn't really matter. And then it'll hold still for you while you trace out around it. This cork is pretty prone to shredding when you try to cut it with a knife, so if you trace it out on here first and then cut it out with some scissors, you'll get much cleaner lines. This is post-apocalypse though, so if you do end up shredding the sides, don't worry about it. That'll be fine. I just repeated that process on the clipboard. Then I ended up moving this little one a little closer to the edge because I didn't want that hole right on the edge of the thing, because it would be a gap, not a hole, after I cut it out. So for cutting this out, you could use a scroll saw if you've got one. A jigsaw might be okay, but it's a little bit unwieldy. The box cutter works pretty well. You just got to make some pretty deep lines and then break it. Whatever method you use, figure out some way to do it and go ahead and cut those out. I went ahead and used the box cutter here because it works just fine. I didn't think to record what I was doing, so I just recorded a little spot here to show you. I'm holding the box cutter like a pin and drawing the line around, and then I make several passes doing that till I get the thing deep enough to break it off. And then when you go to break it, whichever side you're pushing down is the side that the paper is going to peel away from. So always do that to your waste piece. Once you've broken that off, you can use a pair of pliers to just snap off any bits that are hanging out around the edges, and then go ahead and trim and sand it. Now you can go ahead and stick your cork to the board. It might be a good idea to line it up before you peel the sticky backing off, just in case something went screwy with your cutting and it's not actually the same. Just flip it around back and forth until you get it right. And if you have some excess hanging off, you can just trim it, it'll be fine. Alright, now we got some pretty good road pieces, but they need some paint. Unless you're just doing dirt road, then actually this is a pretty good base. So for paints, I'm going to be using these. One thing real quick though, I have this pavement paint, but I haven't actually bought any more pavement in like a year, because if you've got black and gray, you've got pavement. Even black and white, honestly. Just go ahead and mix up something that looks like asphalt to you and smear it out. As far as the edges on this thing, you could leave them plain, you could paint them with the same paint, you could go back and paint them black if you want to, whatever, it doesn't really matter. I just use the same paint because it's already so dark, it's fine, it'll work. For the cracks in the road, you can use a sharp pin or a pokey tool or tweezers or really anything that's kind of sharp, and just sort of scratch it repeatedly until you manage to dig out some of the cork. It does look really bad and like you scratched out way too much while you're doing it, but then once you dust it off, it's actually pretty good looking. Just try not to put the cracks on the edge where the roads are going to connect, because then it'll be really hard, if not impossible, to ever actually match your roads up to a way that actually kind of makes sense. As far as how many and how deep, that's up to you. If you want like a dangerous terrain area, you could put a little hole so the car's tires can get stuck in it, or they get a hazard for going over it, that kind of thing. These ones I'm just going to do some general cracks just for looks. As for all these little pieces you chipped out, save that stuff. You can definitely use that for debris and rubble and rocks and whatever else later. Crumbles of cork are always good for something. To add a little bit of variation to this, I'm just going to use a pewter gray and a lighter gray, I don't know what color it is, and just to use a sponge and blot it around. You could also put the paint on a paintbrush and flick it super fine so that it's like little speckles. Whatever method you want to use. If you are using a sponge though, try to use a pretty big one, because a small one's going to make a repeated pattern that looks very strange. Once you're all happy with that, you can go through with some yellow paint and do your center line. You can freehand it, you can do a stencil, you can do whatever. I did do this first one semi-freehand, but then I went back on the second straight one and made sure that each line was a 1/2 inch long and a 1/2 inch apart. Then you got to do the white lines, but I mean that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to explain how to draw a straight white line, right? The yellow lines on the curved ones were definitely tricky. Now you could go through and stick in some little tufts of grass or whatever you want to do. I'm going to leave these pretty plain. But now it's time to take some black wash and dull down some of this brightness. This is my homemade wash. It's mostly black with some brown and some green. And I've dumped other colors in there because they happen to still be on my brush. No airbrush this time. We're not going for a gentle touch here. Just get a big heavy brush, get a whole bunch of black wash on it, and smear it around. The grimier this is, the better. So you don't have to be particularly even with it. You can leave puddles. That's totally fine. The only thing you want to watch out for is tide lines. You don't want to do a straight strip down the white line and then not do the rest of the thing, because you'll have the weird tide line. So definitely cover all of it, but if you get puddles, that's fine, leave them. And now let that dry completely. And once it's dry, you can go in with my old favorite hairspray and just hose everything down. That will seal in your paints, and it should seal the cork pretty well, just to make sure that you're not going to get any water damage if you live in a humid area. Now we can arrange these into a road and see what it looks like. It's not a bad mini track. And this section right here is where you put a ramp, but maybe we'll do that a different time. For now, I'm happy with this little mini track we got going on. Some of the gray splotches on that one strip are a little bit too much. I may go back and change that a little bit, but overall this is looking pretty good to me. Also, the hairspray is not dry yet, so it's still super shiny. Now if you got to use one of these turn templates, you actually have somewhere you can do that and not go flying off the track. Now if you've used the dollar store clipboards and the stick-on cork as your base for, I guess you could call it tiles, but for your roads, because of the size of this, any sort of chipboard or hardboard is going to be a really similar thickness, and you can use that to make, the extra scatter terrain and the side of the road, use it as basing material for barricades or whatever you want to do, and it all match up pretty well. Plus you can buy a giant sheet of this hardboard for nothing. It's just a lot harder to work with than clipboards. So for the spotlight this week, we got Halfling Hobbies, or Halfling Hannah, as I know her over on the Discord. She's got a bunch of really good videos on all kind of stuff that DMs should know. She does do some crafting stuff too. She recently made a working drawbridge, which is just amazing. She's also building a YouTube studio in her place. That'll be pretty cool. You can watch the video. She explains all the different areas it's going to have. So that'll be really cool. I'm actually kind of jealous of that. So yeah, go on over to Halfling Hobbies and check it out, or stop by the Discord. She hangs out in there too. That'll do it for this one. Of course, as always, thanks for watching everybody. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.